Hi, welcome to Parenting The Adlerian Way. I'm your host, Adlerian family counselor and parenting expert Alyson Schafer. Each week, I answer your burning parenting questions to help reduce the stress of parenting one tip at a time. We'll explore Adlerian psychology together and learn methods of child guidance for raising a happy, confident, capable, resilient child. Hi, it's Alyson. Welcome back to the podcast. I have another great guest to bring to you today. It's Dr. Sax. Let me tell you a little bit about him. So Dr. Sax earned his bachelor's degree in biology from MIT, where he graduated Phi Beta Kappa in 5 semesters at the age of 19. He then went on to the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned both his PhD in psychology and his MD. Next, he did a 3-year residency in family practice at the Lancaster General Hospital in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And in 1990, he established a family practice in Montgomery County, Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C. He then took a 5-year sabbatical, 2008 to 2013, to devote himself to full-time visiting of schools and communities and also to write. He returned to clinical practice in 2013 near his home in Chester County, Pennsylvania, while continuing to lead workshops and give keynotes based on his visits to more than 500 schools over the past 23 years. Dr. Sax has led workshops and given keynotes not only all across North America, but also Australia, Bermuda, England, Germany, Italy, Mexico, New Zealand, Scotland, Spain, and Switzerland. He has written 4 books for parents: Why Gender Matters, which David Brooks of the New York Times called a lucid guide to male and female brain difference, and Boys Adrift, which was praised as excellent and informative by the Journal of American Medical Association. Another book, Girls on the Edge, which Caitlin Flanagan of The Atlantic called the best book about the current state of girls and young women in America, in which Dr. Sax warned about the dangers of social media for girls. He also wrote The Collapse of Parenting, which we're going to talk about today, although the other books are fascinating. We'll have to have him back on. But The Collapse of Parenting, which was a New York Times bestseller. So welcome to the podcast, Dr. Sax.
Thanks for inviting me.
I was very intrigued by the title of your book, and I'm curious for those listeners that are joining us now. What was the impetus, or what were you seeing in your practice that was the driving factor to say, I've got to put pen to paper and start talking to the world about this?
Okay, so we're talking about my book, The Collapse of Parenting.
Yes, absolutely. I know you've got many.
So there's actually a new edition of that book coming out October 1.
Oh,
and
good timing.
I begin the new edition with a story that answers your question. So mom brought her daughter into the office and explained that her daughter was sick. And you could see her daughter was sick. She had a fever. Mom said she had a sore throat. And mom explained what's going on. So I said, okay, time for me to take a look. Would you please open your mouth and say, ah? And the daughter shook her head no, with her mouth clenched shut tight. I said, all right, Mom, looks like I'm going to need your help here. Would you please ask your daughter to open her mouth and say, ah? And Mom said, her body, her choice. Now, my body, my choice has been a slogan of the abortion rights movement for many decades, actually. And in recent years, it was a slogan of the activists opposed to the COVID-19 vaccines, my body, my choice. Mom is using that slogan to defend her 6-year-old daughter's decision not to cooperate with me, the physician, to look at her throat when she's sick. And I need to look at her throat because there's lots of reasons kids have a fever and sore throat: strep, staph, Haemophilus, corynebacteria, viral illnesses, other processes. You need to look at the throat in order to make a diagnosis. That is an extreme example of what I mean by the collapse of parenting. This mom has so bought into this new notion of gentle parenting, which means you let kids decide everything, that mom is derelict in her duty to get her daughter a proper exam at the doctor's office. That's an extreme example, and it's not typical. It's unusual, but I see many, many more examples of parents who kind of know they should be doing the right thing, but they are unsure of their authority. So another case from my own practice, daughter is anxious, depressed, sleep deprived, tired, and going to bed with her phone and looking at her phone throughout the night, which she freely admits, texting and receiving texts from her friends at 2 in the morning. And this girl is 12 years old. And I said, Mom, you've got to take her phone from her every night at 9 o'clock, switch it off, put it in the charger, which from now on is going to be in the parents' bedroom. She can have it back tomorrow morning. And Mom said, oh, yeah, I know I probably should do that, but if I took her phone away, she'd totally freak out. And she's talking about her 12-year-old daughter. She knows that what her daughter is doing is unhealthy, but she feels powerless as the parent to do anything about it. And those are two illustrations of what I mean by the collapse of parenting. And the objective of the book is not merely to say shame on you, but to encourage and empower those parents to do the right thing, to find the courage to do the right thing across a wide range of domains, not just with regards to screens.
So if you were to, do you know the work of Diana Baumrind,
Baumrind, yes.
Thank you. Yes, there you go. Thank you.
Diana Baumrind is
I would have gotten it eventually.
In the new edition.
Yeah.
And I devote many pages to Diana Baumrind, who coined the terms authoritarian, authoritative, permissive, and neglectful, based on her more than 50 years of research following kids in a longitudinal fashion. As I point out, she really pioneered modern parenting research. Before Diana Baumrind, parenting books were written by quote-unquote experts who shared their opinions. Notably, Dr. Benjamin Spock wrote a big book that was regarded as a Bible back in the 60s. But it wasn't based on evidence. It was based on what Dr. Spock believed, based on his experience. But Diana Baumrind, she and her students would spend typically a minimum of 10 hours observing a child in the child's home with the parents to determine what kind of a parenting style these parents typically employed. And then she followed these kids for 5, 10, 20, 30 years to see what are the results. And she is the one who showed us and taught us that authoritarian parents who are too strict, not loving, and whack their kids, those kids grow up to have trouble expressing love and receiving love. They're more likely to be convicted of a felony for a violent crime. That the children of permissive parents who don't enforce boundaries, those kids are more likely to grow up anxious and depressed and addicted to drugs or alcohol. That the best parent is the authoritative parent who is both strict and loving. But in the years before her death in 2018, she wrote that she was concerned, and this is a major focus of the new edition of my book, The Collapse of Parenting, where I talk a lot about her last essays before her death, which were published after the first edition of my book, where she said she was concerned not only that American parents are becoming more permissive, but that the researchers who study parenting have kind of lost their bearings and are also now expecting parents to be more permissive and not really understanding what she meant by authoritative. So I think that's important for parents to understand, especially parents in North America and the United States and Canada, because I have visited with and spoken with parents around the world, and I am quite convinced that parents in the United States and Canada, on average, are more permissive than parents, say, in Germany or German-speaking Switzerland or Scotland. And I think that's a problem. And I think that, so actually the original title of my book was The Collapse of American Parenting. And the subtitle was why your kid would be better off raised outside North America. And the title was tongue-in-cheek, but the evidence I presented, a child in the United States is 14 times more likely to be on medication for attention deficit disorder than a child in the United Kingdom. 40 times more likely to be on medication for bipolar disorder compared to a child in Germany. 90 times more likely to be on medications like Risperdal, Zyprexa, or Seroquel compared to a child in Italy. So, and 40 years ago, there was no difference in psychiatric prescribing between North America and Europe. But today, kids in the United States and Canada is following closely behind the United States. Canada, unfortunately, is following the United States in many respects, and this is one of them. The United States now leads the world in the prescribing of psychiatric medications for children, and Canada is number 2.
So, sorry, can I just insert here that I think that adds to another thesis piece in your book, which is, yes, it is the collapse of parenting, but there's also the medicalization and the pathologizing that is not just coming from parents, that we have as other institutions. That, teachers are the first to say, little Tommy won't sit still at carpet time, so you better go get him looked at for ADHD. And we have a pharma industry that's very happy to throw them onto Adderall, which ADD for all is how they came up with that name. So it's not, the parents are one pillar of this, but really it is, you said it's a toxic culture, and that includes all of other branches of society, not just parents.
Well, 20 years ago, I first wrote about the medicalization of misbehavior, because I've been a medical doctor in the United States for 38 years, and I've witnessed this firsthand. 30 years ago, let's imagine an 8-year-old boy, because I've encountered this in my office on many occasions, an 8-year-old boy who is really out of bounds at school. He is defiant, he's disrespectful, he spits, he talks back, he bites. 30 years ago, the teacher or the counselor or the principal would have said to the parents, your son is rude, he's defiant, he's disrespectful, he talks back, he spits. Today, the same child exhibiting the same behavior, it is unlikely that a teacher or principal in the United States is going to say your child is rude. It's much more likely that the counselor or the principal will say, your child's behavior, he may meet criteria for oppositional defiant disorder or perhaps conduct disorder. Have you thought of having him evaluated? Well, what's the difference between saying to a parent, your son is rude, and saying to a parent, your son may meet criteria for oppositional defiant disorder? You could argue that those are notational variants. They're two ways of saying the same thing and describing the same child, but they're really very, very different statements. If you say to a parent, your son is rude, then the implied next sentence is, I need you, the parents, to step up and teach your son the minimum that we expect of a child in a school, which is you don't bite, you don't spit, and you don't disrespect the teacher. But if you say to a parent, your son may meet criteria for psychiatric disorder, then the reasonable next question is, well, who do you recommend to do the evaluation, and should a medication be initiated? We don't blame people for having psychiatric disorders. We don't tell someone with schizophrenia to snap out of it. The dominant theme across North America is that psychiatric disorders are due to chemical imbalances that are nobody's fault, that need to be remedied with medication. And that shifts responsibility away from the parent to me, to the prescribing physician. And that's why I've been writing about this for 20 years, that I don't think that's where it belongs in the case of this 8-year-old boy. Because most of these 8-year-old boys, and I'm very blunt, I say that your son's problem is you. You failed to teach him the basic rules of social behavior. And in the United States and also in Canada, we're seeing this enormous rise in kids being diagnosed as being on the spectrum. A kid in the United States is more than 10 times as likely to be diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum compared to a kid in Spain. Is that because autism is truly 10 times more common in the United States than it is in Spain? No. Because one of the characteristics of true autism spectrum disorder is that the kid doesn't understand social rules. And so this 8-year-old boy is spitting and kicking, and it's awfully easy to say, well, he's on the spectrum. And that excuses him. And I have seen kids who are diagnosed as being on the spectrum because they are violent and impulsive. Well, there's a lot more to being on the spectrum than being violent and impulsive. But American physicians seem to have forgotten that. And any kid who's acting out in class and kicking and spitting in this country, in my country, is now likely to get that diagnosis. And it's not the correct diagnosis. A thorough evaluation has not been performed. And in many cases that I have been involved in firsthand, I can tell you that this boy is not on the spectrum. He's got parents who've never taught him anything about limits or boundaries or courtesy or respect. Boys are not born knowing how to be gentlemen. They have to be taught. And if you don't teach them, some boys enjoy kicking and spitting and And they have to learn that that's not allowed. And if no one is teaching them that, then they go to the doctor, and in the United States, and to a lesser degree in Canada, they're going to get a diagnosis of being on the spectrum or oppositional defiant disorder. And in the United States, a medication will be prescribed. That medication is most often Risperdal, Zyprexa, or Seroquel. Those are medications that were developed to treat schizophrenia, but they will stop the bad behavior. They will. At great cost. They're very dangerous medications metabolically. But that's one reason why a child in the United States, as I said a moment ago, is 90 times more likely to be on such medications than a child in Italy, Risperdal, Zyprexa, and Seroquel, because those medications are being used in my country as a means of behavior control. And that's very troubling. And I devote a chapter in my book, The Collapse of Parenting, to comparing psychiatric diagnoses internationally to warn Americans, and to a lesser extent Canadians, that our countries are outliers, that kids outside North America are much less likely to be on medication. I can tell you also, based on my firsthand visit to schools in Germany and German-speaking Switzerland, that if a 8-year-old boy in Germany or German-speaking Switzerland is being defiant or disrespectful, the first step that teachers will take is not to recommend psychiatric analysis and medication. The first step those teachers will take is to talk to the parents and say, you need to step up here. You need to get your son under control.
Well, we are 100% aligned in all of that. And, you know, I say that this podcast is called Parenting the Adlerian Way, and Alfred Adler, who created Adlerian psychology, individual psychology in Europe, and he was a physician as well. That was his beginning roots. And he certainly started his investigation into understanding that if you want to understand behavior, you have to see the context in which it happens. And so he worked with the school systems, and he created sort of these counseling centers to address these issues as family dynamic issues and discipline issues and issues around belonging and integrating social issues rather than psychiatric and medical issues. And he reduced the juvenile delinquency rate. It's on the books there. And so he was really a leader in this field and writes a lot about the family and classroom applications of principles of discipline that, to your point, are both firm, because we need to use our adult capacities to guide the child. He called it child guidance rather than discipline. I kind of like that word better, because people they think discipline can still be spoil the rod, you know, or what is it? Spare the rod, spoil the child. Yeah. So no, he was much more the firm and friendly, the respectful balance of that, but for sure still having this adult present that has better executive functioning, has a different role of power and control, and to be able to exercise that. And he also predicted that the pendulum would swing, that we have come from this time of really not understanding the psychology of children, of thinking them as chattels and kind of free labor, and they die anyway, so don't get close to them. And seeing this swing to parenting that has the pendulum societally has gone the other direction, where now everything's about emotions and emotional regulation, and you don't want to hurt them, and we've gone way far the other way. And so hopefully your book and his work and what we're trying to share on this podcast in terms of bringing to life what that looks like is to find that middle ground, so that we are both being that active limit setting, boundary setting, teaching social mores. He called it social interest, the care and concern for others, how to integrate into a group, because you got to move out of your infantile egocentric state and think of others. And that's what the work of parenting is. That's what the work of the classroom is. The classroom is the second social group outside of the family that a child has to learn about the bigger world in. So there's so much work to be done here. And the fact that we're falling down, it breaks my heart, and yours too. This is why you're advocating, is children can't advocate for themselves. And when you see the most vulnerable population suffering at the hands of adults who aren't stepping up, and pharma that's overstepping, it's heartbreaking. And we really need to get these messages out to people.
Agreed.
Yeah. So you also talked about the importance of the family meal about how it sounds like a small thing, but it's actually quite a big thing for you. So talk about how family meals can be one intervention as we start to move the barometer in the better, or the needle in a better direction.
So my brand, if you like, is evidence-based. Every claim, every recommendation I make in The Collapse of Parenting, and indeed in all 4 of my books, I'm always providing scholarly research that supports that recommendation. And one of the key studies I cite in my discussion of the family meal is a study by Frank Elgar and his colleagues in Canada, looking at more than 10,000 Canadian adolescents coast to coast. And for each of these 10,000 plus adolescents, they asked them, in the last 7 days, how many evening meals have you had at home with at least one parent? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. And then for each of these 10,000 plus adolescents, they quantified factors like anxiety, depression, prosocial behavior, and they found a huge effect going from, not just going from 0 to 7. Kids with 0 were worst, most likely to be anxious and depressed, less likely to engage in prosocial behavior. Kids with 7 evening meals had the least incidence of anxiety, depression, and highest incidence of prosocial behavior and positive outlook, but at almost every step of the way. So when I do this presentation for parents, I show them Frank Elgar's graph, going from 5 evening meals at home with at least one parent in a week to 6 evening meals at home with at least one parent, going from 5 to 6. You see a significant decrease in anxiety and depression, a significant increase in prosocial behavior and outlook. And then I look at other data showing that kids today are having many fewer meals with a parent than they were having just 20 years ago. And it's now common for middle income and affluent parents to pick up their kids from school and drive them, at least in the United States, it's common to drive them to computer coding class and then to travel team soccer. And the kid is literally eating a sandwich on the way from computer coding class to travel team soccer. And the unintended message those parents are sending is that being amazing and doing all these activities is more important than relaxed time home with family. I tell parents, don't send that message. Cancel the activity. It's more important in terms of risk of anxiety and depression and mental health overall and long-term success. It's more important for your kid to have that evening meal at home with you, with at least one of you, rather than be zooming around trying to be amazing. And, you know, that leads to another interesting study that was conducted by Jean Twenge, certainly one of the leading researchers on all things relevant to children and adolescents. So we all remember March 2020. The pandemic, the lockdowns, schools closing, and there was a lot of buzz that anxiety and depression were rising in the ensuing months, that we were hearing these stories, these anecdotes about teens who were anxious and depressed because they were locked down. And in the spring of 2020, the New York Times ran 2 different articles by 2 different parenting experts who said, hey, forget the limits on screens, just let your kid be in their room on their screens as much as they want, because it's their only way of being in community with their friends. So in late 2020, Jean Twenge and her colleagues interviewed more than 1,500 teens across the United States and quantified what had happened, what had changed as a result of the lockdowns and the pandemic. And she found actually a bimodal outcome. Yeah, there were some kids who were more likely to be anxious or depressed as a result of the pandemic, but there were other kids who were significantly less anxious and depressed since the pandemic began. And she and her team discovered one question you could ask an American teenager in December 2020 and say with perfect accuracy, predict with perfect accuracy whether that teen was doing better or worse. And that one question was, as a result of the pandemic, have you become closer to your parents? Kids who said, yes, I have, were flourishing. Kids whose parents had followed the advice of the New York Times and let their kids sit in their bedroom looking at screens and scrolling through Instagram and TikTok and playing video games, those kids were doing much worse. Turns out that kids need their parents. Not just little kids, but teenagers need their parents. And parents who said, forget the New York Times, we're locked down together. We're going to play board games together. We're going to watch old musicals together. We're going to sing songs together. We're going to go for hikes together. Those kids flourished. And I think it also illustrates in a different way Frank Elgar's point with the Canadian adolescents, that kids' first need, not just children but teenagers, is a close bond with their parents. And don't get confused. Your 14-year-old may push you away, but the parent-child bond is just as important for the 14-year-old as it is for the 4-year-old. And this notion that FaceTime with other kids their own age is any substitute for a parent-child relationship is simply wrong.
So this is pretty controversial stuff for parents to hear, in the sense that, we should do less extracurriculars. What if my kid doesn't make it into Harvard because they have to round out their resume, and if they're going to get on the varsity this, and it's a scarcity mentality. I can't have my kid not go to Mandarin classes. To hear an expert like you say that family dinner is going to be more important than getting out to these extracurriculars.
Absolutely. And again, my brand is evidence-based. So we've got these longitudinal cohort studies, quite a few of them. I devote 2 chapters of my book, The Collapse of Parenting, to reviewing every relevant longitudinal cohort study where they follow children from childhood through adolescence into adulthood, right through 32, 38, 40, 50 years of age. What characteristic of a child or teenager best predicts health, wealth, and happiness when that kid is 38 years old? It's not their marks in school. It's not what college they went to. It's their character, virtue and character, honesty, conscientiousness. Those traits predict health, wealth, and happiness at 40 years of age. Whether you got A's or B's or C's in grade 8 or grade 12 actually doesn't. And then I also cite other work showing that whether you went to Harvard or Stanford, so very, very important study, they looked at kids who were accepted to the most elite universities like Princeton, Yale, and Stanford, and some who went to those, and some who chose to go to less selective universities, and controlled for race, household income, grade point average. So you have basically 2 identical kids from the same kind of home. They were both accepted to Princeton or Stanford. One of them went to that elite school and the other did not. The other went to a state school or even a community college. And then you follow them 20 years down the road. There's no difference in income, no difference in how much money they're earning. Now, it's important to control for all those variables because the children of affluent parents tend to earn more as adults than the children of low-income parents. And it turns out that being accepted to Princeton or Yale may be more of a marker that you were raised by affluent parents. Are you a hard worker? Do you keep your word? Are you honest? Are you conscientious? Those are the characteristics that predict good outcomes. Whether or not you went to Yale versus community college doesn't. And that's really surprising to parents. And that's why in all my presentations, I always include a link to the research and to the follow-up studies, because they need to understand, look, your first priority is not to get your kid into Stanford. Your first priority is to teach your kid to be conscientious and honest. If you want your kid to be healthy, wealthy, and happy at 40 years of age, that's your first priority, is to teach virtue and character.
So parents, please listen when Dr. Sax talks about the research. It may not be the popular decision in your mommy group or your PTA group, but this is what the experts know, because I do believe parents want the greater outcome. They want the longitudinal success, but they also are susceptible to peer pressure. Everybody else is sending their kid there. Everybody else has told me this is a marker of being a good parent. And I think parents are just as fallible about being worried about their own social acceptability.
Funny thing is that parents kind of know this. When I do this one version of this presentation, I begin by asking parents a question. I say, I want to see a show of hands. I'm referring to a longitudinal cohort study where they determined kids' characteristics, comprehensive psychological assessment, and also got the grades from the school at age 12 or 14 or 16. and then followed them and tracked them down in their 30s, 15, 20 years later. What characteristic of a child measured when they're 12 or 14 or 16 best predicts health and wealth and happiness when the kid's in their 30s, 15 or 20 years later? And I'll ask the parents, is it grade point average? Raise your hand if you think it's grade point average. No parent raises their hand. Is it virtue and character? Well, yeah, all the parents raise their hand. They kind of know, they've heard some echo of these studies that virtue and character are better predictors of health, wealth, and happiness than grade point average. So they kind of know this in their head, but they act as if grade point average is the most important thing. And I can tell you as a family doctor, this kid was getting A's and now she's getting B's. This is a major catastrophe. And they bring the child into my office. What do you think? Should we start Adderall or Vyvanse? This is really terrible. And the parent act as if the most important thing is grades. And incidentally, 20 years ago, it would have been common for an American parent to say, hey, I'd rather you get a C on the test or fail the test honestly than cheat and get an A. But now many American and many Canadian parents say things like, hey, you want to get into Stanford, you want to get into Princeton, you want to get into the University of Toronto. You're not just competing against North American kids. You're competing against kids from Asia and Europe. You got to have amazing grades. And there's been a huge increase in cheating across the United States over the last 20 years, which I document. Because parents may kind of know that grades are not the most important thing, but they act as if they are. They think, they behave as if the most important thing is to get perfect marks. And that's unhelpful. And it's another factor among many contributing to the rise in anxiety and depression among kids.
So do you have a solution or a takeaway that a parent today could be listening to like that or work for other, because a lot of people listening to this will be clinicians and parent educators as well. How do we bridge that gap between the knowing and the doing, that they kind of know in their spidey senses, but it's like fear kicks in and they can't play the long game. They're just sort of doing the short game and going against their own purposes. How do we get character back in the parents?
I think it's helpful for university educated parents to show them the research, to show that, hey, grade point average does not predict health or wealth or happiness at 32, 38, 40 years of age. Virtue and character does. It does. And this is how, and this is why, and this is why you need to prioritize virtue and character. And you don't do that by preaching. It begins with supper at home. It begins with spending more time together as a family. And you cannot teach a virtue which you yourself do not possess. To become a better parent, you're going to have to become a better person. But highlighting the importance of conscientiousness and honesty in your child's best interest, and showing parents the research that, hey, attending the best university does not predict health, does not predict happiness. Virtue and character, conscientiousness and honesty do, especially for parents who are open to reading the research, university-educated parents. I have a somewhat different approach if I'm speaking at what we call in the United States a Title I school. This is a school serving low-income parents who did not attend university. But for them as well, it's still the same story. I might not talk about the Harvard, Princeton, Stanford study because those parents don't expect their kids to go to Harvard, Princeton, Stanford. They didn't go to university at all. And actually, that can be off-putting to the low-income parent if you assume that they want their kid to go to Stanford. Their highest priority is that their kid not be convicted of a felony, very bluntly, in those low-income neighborhoods. And so, yeah, the best way to make sure your kid is not convicted of a felony is not to focus on grades and test scores, but to focus on conscientiousness and honesty. And the evidence is very strong there as well. So I customize my presentation for the community that I'm speaking in. But across the board, without regard to race, ethnicity, language spoken at home, or household income, the best predictor of good outcomes is conscientiousness, honesty, and self-control. And that is true for every child, whether they're affluent, low income, francophone, anglophone, etc. We've got research from all across the world, throughout the developed world on this, and the findings are very robust. And as I said, I devote 2 chapters of my book, The Collapse of Parenting, to reviewing basically every relevant long-term longitudinal cohort study that bears on this question, and they all come to the same conclusion. Your top priority should be to teach conscientiousness, honesty, self-control.
So I worked, for probably 5+ years on a campaign to reduce underage drinking, and the approach was about using the power of the relationship. Because when you have a strong relationship with teenagers, they'll listen to your influence. Whereas if you go more the command and control autocratic route, they're more likely to rebel, sneak, cheat, and go around you. And trying to get a parent who's been living in a culture where we say, oh, kids are supposed to individuate and cut the apron strings and they want to be on their own, and to get them to, again, step into the power of the need for that relationship, and to say that that's a protective factor against so many things. I'm stating underage drinking as one, but telling parents having a strong relationship with your child through the whole cycle of their lifespan is one of the most important parenting priorities to have, and not to get distracted by the minutia of, to your point, the grades, the soccer, the school admittance, and everything. It seems like such a simple premise. We've got all this research behind it, and now, gosh, Dr. Sax, we've just got to sell it to them. It's just so hard to get them to latch on and believe it. We need to change the social norms of society need to change in order to make that more palatable or acceptable, I think, to parents. I really feel that's
and a lot of parents also wonder, well, how precisely do I teach that? I mean, I can preach to my kid about why they shouldn't drink, but that's not really going to accomplish very much. And I agree, it will not accomplish very much. So I have a chapter in my book, The Collapse of Parenting, titled Joy. And the emphasis in that chapter is you need to carve out time, ideally every day, but absolutely a few hours every week, to do fun things with your kid. And that doesn't mean doing homework with them. It doesn't mean driving them to soccer practice. It means making the time to do something fun with them. Well, what sort of fun thing? Something that you love to do, you're going to teach to your kid. So I love to sail. We used to own a sailboat. We don't anymore, but you can rent one pretty cheaply at the state park near us. And I've taught my daughter to sail, and we love going sailing together. Last time we sailed the catamaran at the park, we capsized, which my daughter thought was the most fun she'd ever had. Find time to do fun things with your kid. Whatever you love to do, whether it's hiking or golfing or making music or baking, teach your kid to do it and do it with them together. Find time to do fun things together. That's the foundation of a strong parent-child relationship in the 21st century. And then once you have that strong foundation built on love and doing fun things together, your kid's not going to go underage drinking because they don't want to disappoint you. They don't want to let you down. So you've got to begin with building that strong parent-child relationship, which is going to be built on doing joyful, fun things together. And then parenting becomes a breeze because your kid doesn't want to disappoint you. They don't want to let you down.
100%. So I hope that the parents listening realize that if you put the focus on the right activities, and they actually are the more joyful point of parenting anyways. I mean, how many parents are fighting over getting their kid to the tutor and punctuality about getting to the karate class, and instead we can be throwing a ball out in the driveway.
Who are confused, and parents will say, yeah, I do lots of fun things with my kids. My 11-year-old's teaching me to play Grand Theft Auto. Boys used to want to be men, but now I find men who are trying to be boys. No, the right type of activity is not, Dad, for you to sit and have your 11-year-old son teach you how to play a video game. Turn off the screen. Go outside. Teach him how to do skeet shooting. Teach him how to do something that you love to do. The parent needs to teach the child, not the child teaching the parent. What is childhood for? I mean, literally. A 4-year-old horse is a mature adult. The Kentucky Derby is raced with 3-year-olds. A 4-year-old human has barely begun, and a horse is a bigger animal than a human. So it can't just be about biological maturity, because, as I said, a horse is a bigger animal than a human, and a horse is fully mature at 4 years of age. Humans are children or adolescents for more years than most animals live. Why? What's the point? Well, we don't have to guess. We have scholars like Dr. Melvin Conner at Emory, who's devoted his entire career to studying this question, wrote an 800-page monograph, Oxford University Press, titled The Evolution of Childhood, comparing development in other species with development in our species. Why is it so much longer in our species than in any other species, including chimpanzees and gorillas? Why? And the answer is that it takes many years for parents to teach the child right and wrong. That's your job. That's what makes our species unique. So your job is to teach your child all the things they need to know. And when you flip that, when dad says, oh yeah, we spend our weekends with my son teaching me how to play video games, that's turning it upside down. That's not what's in our DNA. Parents, you need to teach your kids something you know, something you love. That's what you want to be teaching your kid in your spare time, whether it's skeet shooting or golfing or sailing or hiking or camping or cooking or making music, something that you know and love. Spend your time teaching that to your kid. That's the foundation of a strong parent-child relationship.
I love that. Your book is just chock full of so much of that evidence-based research. I hope people read the book and then go farther, go back and go look at that original research. It's all cited there. It's fantastic. And your other books too. Is there anything in this conversation that you want to make sure gets covered for the people covering this part of your knowledge base? You have so many other areas we could go, obviously.
So my short suggestions to parents are: be courageous in prioritizing the family. If the activity conflicts with that family meal at home, cancel the activity. When you're in your car with your kid, no earbuds, no headsets allowed in the car. Your child should be listening to you, not to Cardi B or Megan Thee Stallion or Drake. And when you go on family vacations, no peers, no child friends allowed. If you go on a vacation and your kid brings their best friend along with them, it's your kid and their best friend going up on the chairlift at the ski resort. It needs to be you and your kid on that chairlift. You need to prioritize the family and have the courage to do that, because if you live in North America, your neighbors are not doing this. And your child's going to say, well, Emily got to take her best friend, the neighbor kid, and I'm sure she did. But you've got to have the courage to do things differently.
Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your book. Maybe we'll have another opportunity to talk about the content of some of the other great books that you've written. But for today, this was really great. And I'm so excited that I got to tell you that there's this guy called Alfred Adler and you would love him. So hopefully you'll spend some time getting to know him. Maybe come present at some of our conferences. We are your people and we're always looking for new presenters. So really great to connect.
Well, thanks again for inviting me.
You bet. Take care.
As you know, it takes a village to make a podcast, so thanks to my team, including Max Cotter, my editor and technician, as well as the crew at H2O Digital. This podcast was recorded in Toronto, Canada. We acknowledge the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit.